everyone. We're just going to take a minute to let everyone in. You know, it always takes a couple of seconds on this wonderful creation called Zoom. So I think there are still some people just coming in. And then we'll get started.
Yeah.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, on this lovely Wednesday afternoon. And if you're in Pune, there is definitely a chill in the air. Welcome to Wake Up, Speak Up. My name is Vandana Saxena-Poria. I am the human alarm clock, affectionately known by many as the porcupine, because I like poking, and we'll be poking lots today.
Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Aman Zaidi. I'm called mostly by Vandana Merlin because I help people discover the the magic inside them. And I'm also called the Falcon because I like to help people see a broader picture of anything. So welcome.
And great to have you with us. And as you know, we're called Wake Up, Speak Up because the whole idea is to kind of disrupt thinking on a particular area with a view to how do we make this world a better place?
Yeah, Wake Up, Speak Up is all about ensuring that all of us can thrive together. And the topic that we've chosen this time is diversity or diversity.
Yeah, and let's look at how important diversity is in our individual lives today. So, Aman, will you be my guinea pig?
Let's go for it.
Okay. So, Aman, where do you keep your money?
Well, I've learned through bitter experience to keep it in different places. Bank, FDs, savings, equity, different places. Yeah.
And why do you do that?
Well, because I want not to take the risk of having it in one place. I want to diversify my risk.
Okay. And Aman, tell me something. Do you eat the same type of food every day?
Don't be ridiculous. There's spinach on some days and there's methi on others and there's chicken on the good days. Different stuff.
And some junk food every now and again as well.
Yeah. Burgers are my go-to favorite.
Okay. And last question. Have you done this same job over and over in your life? Like, is it the same thing that you've been doing since you graduated?
No, I'd die of boredom if I was doing that. No, different stuff every few years.
And that's it, isn't it? I think that's the point we're trying to get at. We can see how important diversity is in our lives, from how we spend our time to to what we eat, to everything we do.
Absolutely. The thing is, if you look at diversity only in the work or social context, you actually forget that diversity, when you try and take a bigger view of diversity, you'll realize that it's all around us, every single place in the world.
And it's almost seamless in its acceptance as well. Overall, it's there. How important is it in nature then, Aman?
Well, incredibly. Let's look at plant life. Let's look at animal life. You don't have one variety of roses. What would Rose Day be if you didn't have a yellow rose or a white rose? You'd be giving red roses to everybody. So crops everywhere.
So genetic diversity in crops is important because of infections and infectious diseases. Some crops are only going to survive basically because they have genetic diversity in them. What about in humans, Aman?
Oh yeah, let's start with the digestive tract. The more diverse the bacteria in our digestive tract are, the better our health is going to be, our longevity is going to be, the better our protection and our immunity from not just physical, but also mental ailments. So our gut bacteria, the more diverse they are, the healthier we are. And you look at communities where you don't have enough genetic diversity. You have communities that have married within that community for generations. And what they've done is they've shrunk their genetic material, the gene pool. and they're now beginning to have genetic diseases. But instead, if you have people who've been intermarrying, they have this diverse gene pool, they don't have those diseases. So genetic diversity actually helps our chances of survival. It protects us from disease.
So look, it's clear from everything around us, all the conversations we've just had, that diversity is really, really important. Then why, oh why, Aman, is there so much bloody resistance to diversity in the workplace?
Well, there's a bunch of reasons, right? One of the reasons, especially in the workplace, is that people are, and this I was actually talking to a friend of mine, a guy called Jatin Tiwari. He actually works with, with blind people, and he tries to get them accepted into the workplace. And he's saying one of the challenges is that the manager thinks that he'll have to actually work harder to accommodate somebody who's different. Oh, will I need a different kind of software now for a blind person? I'm going to have to use a different kind of a chair for somebody who doesn't have legs. I'll have to build a ramp, different toilets. It's too much work. So the resistance comes from, we want to include people because we don't want to work hard.
So that's true. What else?
And yeah, and then of course, there's other reasons as well, but let's hear your view.
The thing is that I think diversity tends to rub people up the wrong way because they feel threatened, right? People get really defensive and about something. If one group's being favored, then they feel like they're being unfavored, and others then jump onto that bandwagon. In our culture, unfortunately, and it's not just our culture, I think across the world, as we've seen with some elections that shall be unnameable, people almost want to live in ghettos. They want to hire the same kinds of people. There's anti-immigration because there are people who are different, right?
Yeah, we've all seen that. And, why do you think that happens?
I really think it is to do with people feeling threatened and ultimately afraid. We're afraid of people that are different to us. And neuroscience, the amygdala and the way the amygdala works in the brain is a great example of that. Coming from the animal kingdom, our brain is kind of built to help us survive. So sometimes it sends messages to us that don't really apply in today's time. So we feel threatened about something that we shouldn't feel threatened about, but it sends warnings when we're kind of encountering something that's unfamiliar. And other parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, are supposed to rationalize these impulses, but often don't.
Yeah. And another factor is all the conditioning and the rules that we are brought up with, right? I mean, for example, to your point about difference, let's say I have grown up eating only with spoons, and somebody else, if I see them eating with their hands, it is unfamiliar to us. Some of us react with curiosity, others may react with disgust, because essentially it's something that you haven't seen before. It's different, and our exposure is limited. And to worsen things, we are not taught to value encountering new things.
It's really funny you say that, because I remember as a kid in England, right? So at home, obviously, we're eating roti, sabzi, dal, chawal with our hands. And occasionally mum would give us like a packed lunch, which had Indian things. And so we'd have like a paratha, and I'll be merrily eating it with my hands. And everyone would be staring at me. Everyone would be staring at me like, what are you doing? Eating with your hands? And then I'd get really embarrassed. And then there were the smells around us and all this other stuff.
It's very funny. I've had a similar, but the exact opposite experience, Vandana. I don't like eating rice with my hands. I always eat my dal chawal or my biryani with a spoon, and a fork. And I get, from my family and from my friends, I get stares. The family is a little more tolerant, but you've got friends who've gone as far as to say, "Ye kya hai Angrez ki aulad?" which is terrible, but that's the way it works.
Yeah, that's very true. And so we end up being victims of the conditioning of what we're used to. And again, that's the amygdala coming in, right?
Yeah. And if we can't, and that's the thing, the victims of what we've seen, our conditioning. And if we can't overcome those, then you end up being not such a good friend, a terrible citizen, a very poor leader.
Yeah, well, talking about leaders and resistance in the workplace, I would like to introduce our special guest for today, Sumitra Lemay, who we call Somi affectionately. Somi, it's great to have you with us. Somi is the Director of Digital Technology Labs at IBM and also the first equality champion that they've got globally. So welcome, Somi. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Vandana. Likewise.
So I'm really interested to know from your perspective, why the resistance in the workplace? You've been in the global workplace for many years. Why the resistance and what's causing the change now, in your opinion?
So I think, and again, the basis of the resistance is all, everything that you've spoken about, Aman has spoken about, right? In my mind, it is a lot of societal problem that does exist when it comes to inclusion or diversity, and that naturally would spill into the workplace, right? I do believe there are more mediums today, and there's been more precedent today as to people speaking up, people talking about the problems that they're facing, and therefore a greater realization over a period of time, right? I think the key important understanding is in what you said. Each of us are unique, each of us are different from an experience standpoint, from the way we're brought up, all of that. Some of us have been lucky enough to be privileged, right? Now it is about how we use the privilege to ensure that everyone has the same starting point, right? So just given the way society works today, I think naturally some, people who are diverse or people who are different from us would start off on a back foot, right? So I think it's providing that same pedestal that is really important. And, that's basically equity, right? So how do you provide equity as a part of this process? And, interestingly, I think a lot of the realization, while this is the right thing to do, and this has got to do more with emotions, right? The mediums to express and people saying over a period of time that, no, you know what, we need the same opportunities, we need the same treatment, really. But it's also got to do with data. So one aspect of it is the emotions. But I think the important aspect of it is the data, because corporates do look at data. And I think, personally speaking, I would say I've been lucky enough to be in a company like IBM, which really has a history of inclusion, right? A very long history of inclusion, in fact. And I think if you look at data, it's very clearly established that strong diversity and inclusion practices impact business performances as well, right? So just to give you an example, there are studies by BCG, by McKinsey, that actually talk about how a highly inclusive, engaged workforce provides an operating profit of 27% beyond, or 3 times, right, from what I remember, beyond anyone else who doesn't, right? We are talking about gender diversity, we are talking about ethnic diversity, we're talking about disabilities, you mentioned neurodiversity, everything around those lines. And if you look at companies that have below average diversity scores, their innovation and speed of innovation and revenue generated as a result of innovation is significantly lower, right? We've seen one of those reports clearly calls out that 45% companies who have a diversity score above average, 45% average innovation is above any other company who's either at an average or below average diversity score, right? So these are telling from a business standpoint as well. And I think we've come to a point where from a corporate standpoint, you can't really ignore the hard facts, because a lot of people are going to say, well, you know what, this is a good thing to think of, this is probably right, but how do we know what difference it makes? And, the data talks. So the data is saying today that, guys, this makes a difference, right? In your profitability, in your innovation, everything you guys are doing. So, yeah.
And I want to interrupt you there to talk about this. Aman, I want to ask you, do you know why Unilever decided to bring diversity in massively?
Because diversity is the dumb thing?
Well, exactly. That's what people think. They think it's a good thing to do. No, Unilever's reason for doing it was purely profitability. Unilever woke up about 10 years ago and realized that 90% of the people that buy their products, right? 90% of the people who buy the products that are used 2 billion times a day, right, are women. And they suddenly thought, if we don't have diversity in our workplace, how are we really going to have a feel and a pulse of what's going on. And yes, we've seen profitability increasing. So, absolutely, it is the right thing to do. But as Somi says, it is all about profitability as well.
Yeah, and I think it's very important what Somi and you are talking about, because I remember seeing a graph which had the diversity index on one side and innovation scores here, and there's a very clear correlation, like Sumitra pointed out. And I think it's unfortunate that more people don't realize this, because I've had the exact opposite experience to what you mentioned, right? There was a time that I was associated with a training agency some time back, and these guys had actually been plagued with sluggish growth. Year on year, the growth used to be minuscule. And at one point, I took a close look at their leadership council, and there was not enough diversity, I noticed, on the council. There were no young people. Everybody was 45 to 65. You had no representation from different departments. You had only people from delivery, the important folks. Most people came from an engineering education background, and they kind of did their own thing. And it was a very non-inclusive decision-making process. And so we nicknamed them the Ivory Tower. So they do their own thing.
They're sitting up at the top, right?
Now I know, Vandana, that you've actually sat on boards, and I know that you've taken a close look at how diverse the boards of different organizations are. Can you share that with all of us today?
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting because I call the opposite side, and I'm going to share a slide. Hopefully it's going to come up and you're going to be able to see it. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Has it come up?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've got Ivory Towers. I say we should have more diversity showers, right? Ivory Towers, same kind of thinking. What boards really need is what I call a diversity shower. And I just want to give you some examples. Like if we look at, and of course, I haven't cherry picked these companies, honestly, I promise you. I just looked at some of the really spectacular collapses that have happened over the last 15, 20 years. And it is very interesting to see, whoops, my computer wants to do lots of different things. Here we go. It's very interesting to see the boards of, three really big companies that were really ivory towers: Kodak, Enron, and Blockbuster. Blockbuster, that made the videos. Incredible undiversity, ivory tower. And also, if you looked at the age group of these white males, they were all kind of like between 5 and 8 years, right? From the bottom age to the top age. If you look at what I call the diversity showers, we see that Unilever, PepsiCo, Amazon have got, so on here we've got males and females, and then we've got people of color, so people who are not white. So you can start to see that diversity is creeping in. But as Adit has said, and Neelam has also said in the chat, it's not just about people looking diverse. So let's have more women. It's got to be about other things, right? But before we get to those other things, we are going to talk about them. I just wanted to bring Somi in again. You gave us a really good example recently of why diversity works when you talked about Diwali and Diwali gifts. Do you want to just share that with us?
Sorry, I was just looking for the unmute button. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's much, and again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's a huge potential for diversity of thought and perspective when work groups include employees from different backgrounds. When the work climate is truly inclusive, we've time and again seen, when people are really empowered to contribute, the idea flow is much better. There is a lot more success in terms of what the outcome should be. And there is really no fear of rejection or criticism, right? I think a lot of it is to do with the environment and the culture that you said about. So yeah, the Diwali gifts, and this was the most recent one. So it's really fresh in memory. So we were thinking of, as a leadership team, or the ivory tower, as Vandana, you put it over here, right? We were kind of debating, what should we be gifting our employees on the occasion of Diwali this year, and since everyone is working from home. So some of us had some ideas. I said, we should give a book to everyone. Somebody else said, yeah, well, you can have a hamper, chocolates or dry fruits or what have you. right? And it kind of stopped there, and everyone decided. And this is a team of we are 12 of us, so me including my direct reports, and all of us said, yeah, perfect. Let's go ahead and execute. And it so happened one of those leaders spoke to their first line manager, and the first line manager over here is the person responsible for the team. They speak to, this individual speaks to the team every day, right? And really has a pulse of what's going on in the team. And because that was done, because this idea was shared by one of the second line managers to the first line manager, who in turn is linked to the teams. And this is the other problem, right? Hierarchy and the flow of information. But the minute that happened, what came about is a suggestion to say, hey, it's great you're doing books and you're sending hampers and dry fruits and chocolates and all of that. But guys, this is a different time, right? We are living in unprecedented times. We are living in a time when people are at home. There are different kinds of frustrations. There are family pressures. There's so much of a schooling happening from home, all kinds of things, right? So why don't you guys actually step it up and have personal custom letters shared with each of the employees, right? Where you're actually writing the employee's name. You're mentioning the names of their spouses, children, parents, everyone at home, right? And really make it something that connects people, right? And and the reason that happened is because there is, or at least I would love to believe that there is that culture of sharing, there is that culture of bringing in ideas. But if this leader hadn't shared this information with the first line manager, we would have never realized that. What that resulted in is 400 people in the organization had personalized letters written to them apart from everything else, right? And that made a difference. We had parents of these employees calling up the managers or sending thank you emails, or just saying it was so awesome that you guys actually thought of us at home. You guys thought of the families, you guys thought of the children, you took the time out to write their names in, right? And the messaging was also very specific to that individual, right? So this was just an example of the different experiences that come about when you bring people together, right? And align the outcome to that.
Brilliant.
Thank you. So, it's so clear that there are so many benefits. The data is there, the stories are there, the examples are there. Diversity clearly is the spice of life. So,
and Aman, I just want to say that I remember on LinkedIn seeing some IBMers having posted everything, their letter and the gifts and everything, so they clearly felt very special. So yeah, you're right. Diversity is the spice of life in that respect.
Yeah, I do remember that too. The letters were, they were really, really nice. I saw the photographs of the hamper and the letter with it, and people were showing off the letter. It was great. So going back to what I was saying, hey, it's clear that there are benefits. However, there still seem to be people resisting it, and any thoughts about that, Vandana?
So interestingly, I think Neelam and Adit have been fantastic in their comments, right? Because I want to talk about the elephant in the room, right? It's not enough. I've been very uncomfortable in some very diverse places too. Having diversity alone is not enough, right? And Somi mentioned the word engagement, right? It's beyond that. It's like D&I plus, isn't it? There's no point in just having a diverse team if you're not going to truly respect and listen to them. And I've sat on a board where I realized I'd been invited because I was a woman, but they wanted me there so that they could tick the quota, tick the box. They had me there for lip service, and needless to say, I did not last long.
Yeah, so, and this is the part that actually addresses some of the questions that are coming to us in chat. Subhash Bal has just said something, Adit and Neelam have been talking about it. So clearly focusing only on diversity alone doesn't do it. You've got to move it to a more inclusive way of behaving in thinking, and that's what makes a difference. Let's take India, our own country, for example. We are doubtlessly diverse, but are we really inclusive? Yeah.
It's very true, and so it goes beyond inclusion. This board did make an effort to include me. They would even say, Vandana, what's your opinion on this? But then they would politely rubbish my opinion. So it's not just about including me, it's about belonging. And it's about having a stake in that conversation and others having a stake in your opinion and you, right? And I will see if I can share my slide. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. Because you know, I think this is what it is. And you know, we've kind of paraphrased this from other places. Diversity invites you to the party. Inclusion invites you to dance. But belonging asks if you would even like to have a party or do something else. And while we're at it, equity redistributes the space and the resources so that the invited guests can do what they feel most comfortable doing. So it's all about where you feel at home and comfortable, because that's where you're going to thrive.
Yeah, I think Soumya was also talking about this when he alluded to the fact that there's stuff such as hierarchy and fear and, you know, those things that may interfere with that at-home feeling. So, you know, Vandana, out of curiosity, you know, where do you feel at home most?
That's a really interesting one, actually. If I'm really honest, the places where I felt like, you know, because I have these weird ideas. I'm writing a science fiction novel. I've been an entrepreneur. I do this stuff for the UK and the Indian governments. I do all these different things. And most people in India, honestly, and I'm not talking about this crowd because is my tribe, right? But there's a lot of people out there who just don't understand me because they think that I should be able to fit into a box, right? So the city I felt most at home at being myself are probably Los Angeles, Sydney, Toronto, to an extent, London. Those probably are the places.
And what was it about these cities that that, you know, made you feel at home?
I think the first thing was the openness. There was a certain, what I would call mental safety, right? You could say things without being worried about what people might think or say. And people were okay with different opinions, you know. So in these cities, when I talk to them about my series of science fiction novels or visionary fiction novels, where I talk about different planets and having an 80% female planet or a planet which is totally run by children, they were like, you know, wow, okay, so how would that work? And then they would want to contribute and explore it, but not from a point of trying to tear it down, but how do we build this up? How do we appreciate this? Whereas in other cities and with other people, it's been really difficult. So I've found that there's been greater creative thinking, and because I'm in my element, I'm doing more, and they're in their element, and we just generally do more.
So this you know, feeling at home or this belongingness actually comes from you know, comes from being a sense of being heard. That okay, when you speak, people will listen to your ideas.
Yeah, very much about that mental safety. People will listen to the ideas. But I mean, I'm curious because you've spent most of your career in the UK. Sorry, in India. So where have you felt, you know, sort of in your element in a work situation?
Well, I think the things that matter to me, I found that when I'm allowed to do that, that's great. So, for example, in a people setting rather than a task setting, that's where I feel that I thrive. I think if people are friendly and accepting, if I get a feel of not being directed and criticized and being told who to be,
right?
You know, for example, I don't like what you currently are, and I want you to change into what I think is appropriate. When that doesn't happen, you know, that's that's great. When there's listening, camaraderie, where there's a little bit of poking fun, basically a free environment rather than a regimented one. I felt at home in those places.
Got it. So I'm going to try and put some of those points up. Let's see. So you're saying where you feel trusted. I talked about feeling mentally safe, listening, and where there's camaraderie, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. These are the points these are the factors that create that sense of belonging.
Right. Semi, is there anything you'd add to this?
Yeah, I think we came up with something a few years ago in my team, and as a result of that, across the D&I practice in IBM, a simple slogan that says, "I believe, I belong, I matter."
Sorry, what was the
Right?
third one?
And if you really think about it, I believe, I belong, I matter.
Ah, wow.
Right.
Wow.
And just three sentences, right? But they talk exactly to this point. And if you really start imbibing this, and I think a lot of it is the belonging and the matter, but the belief is
Mm,
also that you start off with the belief saying, this is the space you're going to be in, where you're not criticized, you're looked at for who you are. You belong here, right? So you're free to express. And then what you say also matters, right? Which is why you're here, and which is why your opinion counts. And you matter, not just your opinion, right? And I think that created a wonderful, circle as far as we were concerned,
wow.
to really talk to that. And that's kind of spread across the organization now.
Wow. I believe, I belong, I matter. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Wow. Fabulous. Fabulous. So obviously, the big thing about Wake Up, Speak Up is all about how do we bring this into action, right? And Aman and I were doing some kind of umming and ahhing, and we were trying to be cool with our kids a little while ago. And we decided that what we needed to do in order to make our society and our workplaces more dive, also known as how to dive to vibe with the tribe. Okay, so we're talking about diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equitability. And how do we really bring that in? Because we can't suddenly turn on a tap in the workplace and make it happen if it doesn't start at home. So I wanted to share a very quick story that I've shared with both Aman and Somi, but it's really impacted my whole family. I've grown up with gay people since I was quite young, right? So I'm very comfortable around gay people, lesbians, whatever, LGBTQIA plus, right? So, and that was one of the joys of living in the UK and also living in Eastern Europe for so many years. So it was really important to me that my kids understood from an early age that there was nothing wrong with this. So we used to play the game of life. So some of you may have played the game of life before. You go around a board, you have a little car, and big things happen to you in your life, like getting married. And we were once playing, Zara must have been 4, Jay was about 6. And it was me and my mum. And my mum is incredibly progressive. She's a really well-known progressive author about gender and everything. And my mum landed on get married. And so I said to my mum, would you like to marry a boy or a girl? And my mum looked at me and she knew exactly what I was doing. And she said, I think I'll marry a girl, please. And my kids just looked at us and went, oh, can girls marry girls then? And we said, yeah, why not? And they said, oh, and boys can marry boys. We said, yeah, why not? And that incident, because it was done so peacefully at home, and then they asked a few more questions about it. And then we had friends who they met as well, who were male couples or female couples. Now those two are considered diversity ambassadors at their schools. Any kids who want to come out, come and talk to my kids. Any kids who are being hassled about it, my kids are the ones who stand up and just like, they are normal. So it's really important you start at home to make the next generation aware, to people around you aware as well. So I think the first point here is being mindful and being aware. So who are you in your life, including and excluding, even accidentally, right? The watchmans, the cleaners, the kirana wala. If you refuse to think about that and reflect on that, you're never going to get anywhere. And as Socrates says, an unexamined life is not worth living.
True. We can't help how we are conditioned, but we should aspire to overcome our conditioning. It starts, we've been fed a lot of different things over the years, but we can't stay victim to that. So I want to tell a contrary story again to what you were saying, or counter story to what you're saying, Vandana.
Yeah.
The time that I grew up in India, in the early 80s, I had no exposure. We didn't know about homosexuality or any of that stuff. My first exposure to it was when I was 17 and I'd moved to Bombay. And so as a result of that, I saw it as extremely strange, abnormal. And for many years, and I'm quite vocal, so I would go around quite vocally, proclaiming that, hey, this is not normal. Until one day, a friend here in Pune, he actually told me saying, hey, are you open to a conversation on this? And I said, yeah, sure, I'm always open. And then he took the next 30 minutes. This guy is really skilled, okay? He took the next 30 minutes to deconstruct my thinking. He helped me examine the meaning of the words normal, etc. And in 30 minutes, he brought me to a point where I realized that actually I had no logical reason for my bias. And since that day, things have changed for me personally. So there was a time when I would find it difficult to shake hands with somebody who was gay. But
Wow.
Today, my sister's best friend is gay, and I have no problem. I actually go eat at his house. I'm happy to give him a hug. All that has gone away. Have I been cured of my bias? I won't say that. But now I'm more conscious that, look, there is this bias in my head. And I can then protect myself and others against that bias. So, what I learned is, look, if we want to get rid of our conditioning or those parts of our conditioning that are biased, then there are two things that we need to do. One is you got to accept, you got to recognize the truths that, look, I am this way because of all the things that I have seen or not seen or heard. And step two, we need to become thinking individuals. All right. I mean, we need to challenge the stuff that we've been told, not accept it as gospel, stuff around size or skin color or sexuality or religion. And we can't live life without challenging our beliefs. Right.
Good one.
And I want to go one step further. And this is something that you spoke about earlier, and so did Sumitra. There's a name for this kind of diversity. See, and again, I'm going to go back to the point that we got Adit and Neelam and everybody else raised. So the conversation around diversity is evolving. It is not about gender anymore. It's not even about outward diversity anymore. There are two dimensions of diversity that we're talking about. It's called 2D diversity. The first dimension of diversity is inherent diversity, things such as your gender, your skin color, your ethnicity, your place of birth, etc. And the second one is acquired diversity. Where have you lived? Where have you worked? Where have you traveled? Your experiences, exposure, and edification. So, for example, and this is what Adit, you were writing about in the chat box. When we are looking for somebody to hire, we don't look for somebody who's got 30 years in tech.
Yeah.
We look for somebody who's got 10 years in tech, 10 years in FMCG, 10 years in pharma. That is, acquired diversity, right? And there's an experiment, there's an experiment that we did where there were two teams. One team that had, 2D diversity, so cognitive or thinking diversity, and you had another team that was less diverse. Both teams were actually given one task. And what they found was that the team that had more thinking diversity actually came up with more solutions and was more successful on the task than the non-diverse team. So repeatedly, we've been able to prove that this 2D diversity is really, really beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking beyond just the standard terms of diversity. And yeah, I mean, there are things being done, like there are boards in the UK now where, they'll say, okay, we want to fill this position of, let's say, CFO, and two of the three candidates or three of the five candidates must be women, right? So they won't not interview they won't interview basically only males. So there are things that are coming in, but that is, as we said, the first step. The second step is, are they diverse? Are they showing 2D diversity? Or is the experience all the same? I mean, in the interest of time, I'm going to combine a couple of points of other things that I think people, what you need to ask yourself in the workplace and at home, are you creating mental safety? When your kids ask you something, do you just immediately go no? Or do you say, okay, why do you want to do that? And then really have a conversation with them. If you're not doing that at home, how do you know you're doing it in the workplace, right? If you're not doing it with your maids, if you're not doing it with the people around you, are you doing it elsewhere? And are you being open in those conversations? Are you allowing for people to be able to talk and express freely what's going on within them? Somi, is there anything else that you think we can add to start doing at home that can help diversity that hopefully will then spill over into the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, Vandana. It's you know, we all have biases, as Aman was saying, growing up, right? We grew up with certain beliefs, experiences, etc. And we, as humans by nature, I believe we are all curious, right? If you just combine this curiosity with being sincere, you know, understand the other person, right? Listen to them. Don't jump to a conclusion based on what your perceptions are or what you've been brought up with, right? Aman touched upon a very interesting point when he spoke about the biases. All of us do carry unconscious biases with us, right? And there are various things, and I'd just like to connect this to the, you know, wonderful questions that came from Neelam and Adit, right? Basically talking about you know, some of the scenarios where women today are, you know, almost certain roles are blocked for women, or LGBTQI plus, etc. You know, we have things such as perception bias. We have things such as affinity bias, availability bias, confirmation bias, and all of these are really reflections on some thought processes that we have, right? In an interview setting, you want somebody, or you're naturally biased towards somebody who is similar to you, either in thought process or, you know, skill set or what have you. And that is part of human nature. That is confirmation bias. You have halo effect that is talked about quite a lot. Somebody is talked about outside, is very popular, you automatically have a perception about that person, and therefore there's a bias that comes in. Now, from a hiring standpoint especially, right, there are a lot of interesting things that industry has started to look at. Number one, hiding of names, hiding of gender, hiding of all of that, so you never know who you're really, you know, whose resume you're really looking at. Of course, when you're speaking to the person, that would be apparent, but I think that's a key basic starting point as well. You don't need to know the name, you don't need to know the gender. You just look at skills, and you look at whether the person maps to the role that you're looking for or doesn't, right? uh, there are special initiatives today, and I can, you know, say that with utmost confidence in my organization when it comes to LGBTQIA plus, right, where we actually want that perspective to come in. There's a reach out for that, and, you know, blocking roles for a certain gender, I think after decades, and not even decades, right, centuries of that happening on one side, to a certain extent, it's fair that that should spill over, and, you know, we should look at it the other way. Of course, I do believe over a period of time, it will come down to, you know, your gender doesn't matter, your caste doesn't matter, creed doesn't matter, whether you speak the language or not doesn't matter. Are you fit for the role, right? Do you have the skill sets for the role? And, you know, honestly, I think, Vandana, just ending up, agree with you completely. It starts from home, how you're brought up. A lot of that, I was lucky to have strong women role model, and in my life growing up. And if we can just, you know, more of us can replicate some of those examples, I think it's great. Like Aman, I had a similar incident from a LGBT standpoint, where I wasn't aware of the community, the needs, the challenges faced by this community. It's only when my manager many years ago, who was from Germany, said that he is gay, or came out to me saying that he's gay, that's when I really took an interest and was curious, right? And got into a lot of that work. So yeah, I'll pause here. I know I'm going to continue babbling otherwise, Vandana, but
No,
just
that's
wanted to
great.
quickly
That's
add
great. That is, Somi, you've made some fantastic points there in terms of what IBM's doing and about the steps that you see that people need to take. So thanks for sharing that with us. What we'd like to do is open this up, actually. I know we've got Jill, we've got Lucy, I don't see Advait, but we've got Vikram, you know, Adit. We'd really love to hear from some of you. Jill, can we start with you? Because you've done a lot of work in culture. It'd just be really interesting, you know, any aspects that you want to bring in on. We know it needs to be done, you know, maybe more on the step side. What have you seen that's worked?
Thank you so much, Vandana. It's been fascinating to hear everyone's comments and thoughts on this. And yes, this is an area of work which is very close to my heart as well. So some things I was thinking about. I just wanted to share a quick experience with you. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was presenting at a conference, which is for intercultural practitioners and DEI practitioners. So you can imagine this was about 150 of us who, this is what we do for a living. You know, we're diversity specialists, if you will. And we started to get into some of these conversations about white supremacy and white patriarchy, you know, still pre-election. Let me highlight, this was the US as well as the entire USA conference. And through the process of those 3 or 4 days, it became so obvious how much work we need to do. And when I say we, I mean with ourselves. And so that was a really, really striking experience, to be in a room with individuals who come with the best intentions and who live and breathe the work of DEI, but we're still recognizing areas of their life where they were complicit in terms of, you know, systemic racism or other elements, or not recognizing their own privilege. And so if I take that on a personal level for myself, as a white woman living and working in India for 15 years, on a daily basis, I'm confronted with situations where I have unearned advantages because of my whiteness, and I have unearned disadvantages because of my gender or because of my age and other elements like that. And I think that in order to sort of check your own bias requires such a high level of self-reflection and an awareness, like literally all day at the workplace. Even if this is something that you are very, very much aware of, you know, like the biases that you mentioned, Sumitra, you're familiar with these things and you talk about them and you teach about them. I guess my message for everyone in the room today is that I personally believe it starts with the self. And if I look at Anupa's question, you know, she talked about it being a process or a progression. Absolutely. One, diversity is not, diversity in and of itself is actually, statistically, you'll have lower performance in organizations without inclusion and without equity and without belonging. So that DI plus, which you said, Vandana, is so critical to any of those positive elements that we experience with diversity. I'll just share one model, Anupam, because that might be helpful. It's a dated one. It's called the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity. So it helps us understand how and in what ways we get to that point where we are progressing to levels of inclusion. In the model, the I stands for integration, actually. So integration and higher levels of inclusion. Most of the world and most of us sit at some of the monocultural levels, which are denial, which are minimization. I don't see caste, or I don't see color, I just see human beings. You know, again, it comes with very good intentions, but not necessarily creating those diverse spaces where we feel like we have mental safety and psychological safety and all of that. So even acceptance at certain levels, when you start to move to the higher levels, where you have, you know, curiosity, like you were talking about, and a deep desire to learn more about other cultures and to learn about yourself, is where you start to reach some of those positive impacts of diversity within groups. So these are all the thoughts that I've been thinking about in terms of the conversation. And I think maybe I would just leave you with one story. When I was here in 2007, I was working as part of a group, and I was in an Intercultural Language Training Institute, and they asked me to sit in on some interviews. And we were sitting there, next candidate's gonna come in. I came in and sat down, okay, who's coming in now? They showed the CV or the resume. I was absolutely floored when I saw age, when I saw marital status, when I saw a photograph attached, gender, of course, the whole 9 yards. I could not believe my eyes. I was in a state of shock. And later on had conversations within the organization. And my point of this story is, ask yourself why. Why do we need that information? And at the root of it is going to be one of those biases. And it may be an unconscious bias, a very, you know, we're not aware of it. But ask yourself why. Start that personal journey, ask yourself why. Ask yourself why we ask this question. So where do you stay? are you going to send me something in the mail? Are you going to pop over by my house uninvited? Like, why do you need to know why I stay, where you stay? Sorry, where do you need to know where I stay or where I live? And this really irritates me. I think I've told you this, Vandana, because people always like, oh, where do you stay, Jill, in Corrigan Park? And I'm like, no, I live in Kothrood. So are you going to discriminate against me now because I live in an area which is not so cosmopolitan? So these kinds of questions, even with the most unintentional kind of negative judgment, but really just coming from a natural, normal place, question yourself. Why are we asking these questions? They're triggering our unconscious biases, and of course, that's not what we want.
No, that's brilliant, Jill. And those were the first steps. Yeah, Aman, go.
Yeah, I think some of the things that Jill has talked about, they're in my head at least, they're related to the questions that have come up. And you guys will probably need to forgive me for some things I'm making. But you see, if there's been a lot of questions around gender, and if you see all the questions that have been asked around gender, not one woman has asked that question, right? And that's an interesting statistic that I'm looking at right now. The question around, do we still need women? Here's my take on it. You see, privilege that Jill spoke about, to me, is the opposite of empathy. I don't have to, I've never been through the challenges that women go through. And therefore, I don't have a woman's perspective on it. And if I actually don't acknowledge that, then I'm operating from a place of privilege. And, a lot of us actually do operate from a place of privilege. And because we just look at it from this perspective, right? Can I assume what an LGBTQ person goes through? Do I have their perspective? I don't. So if you're going to not give me a spot on a board or in an organization and bring in somebody who's either LGBTQ or a woman in my place, the reason that is being done is it's not discrimination. It's because that person can actually bring the perspective that I can't bring. Outwardly, it looks like discrimination, but really, if you look deeper, they are more qualified. Maybe not in qualifications and experience, but from a perspective.
In traditional qualifications and experience.
Yeah, from a perspective place. So, it just appears like discrimination against me, but I'm not sure if it is. I mean, at least that's my thought about it. And I also want to address a big shout out to Anupam Saraf. Anupam, thank you for being here. Anupam is somebody I look up to. Those of you who know who he is, will want to give him a big warm hug. And those of you who don't, I suggest go and look him up. There he is. Anupam,
really
thank you for being here. You, yeah, I don't know when you joined, but we did speak about this. And, you hit the nail on the head with the question that diversity alone is not enough. I think the mistake that many organizations make is that they only look at diversity as the metric. And the metrics, like we've been talking about, are inclusion, belonging, empathy, listening, culture, all of that stuff, because that's where the value is. That's where we actually create a place where everybody feels that they can communicate, that they can understand each other, that they can innovate, that they can thrive. Because if we don't do any of that stuff, then we have a very diverse workforce that hates each other.
Yeah, Aman, I just wanted to see if we could get, I don't know if Adit is still on the call, because he put, quite a few comments towards the end. Maybe we can get both Anupam and Adit to say a few words. Anupam, do you want to start? And we'll look for Adit in the meantime.
Okay. Well, I mean, looking at diversity, I always think that, we need different things for breakfast. You can have different diversity for breakfast. You can have egg and breads, or you can have idli dosa, or you can have vada sambar, or something else. So when you talk about diversity for lunch or dinner, it's very different. So I think, diversity is very contextual. So when we are looking for diversity in a sports team, when we are looking for diversity in maybe on a board, when we are looking for diversity in the government, we probably are looking for different kinds of diversity. So I don't think we should lump, and I think Jill put it very well. I don't think it's just one kind of diversity that we should be looking at. And therefore, I would encourage that, you think about different kinds of diversity that is required from the context of where we want the diversity to happen. Also, as Aman already mentioned, the whole point is that it's not just about saying that we are a very diverse organization. If I am part of a team, I don't just want to be included because I bring in diversity. I want to be included because I am not only bringing inclusion, but I am actually belonging to the team. I bring value and I make a difference. And I think it's important to be able to build that culture into organizations.
Yeah, brilliant. Great point, Anupam. Thank you. Lucy.
I'm sorry. Go
yeah,
for
Vandana.
it.
Hey, Lucy, would you? So Lucy's from MasterCard, and she's working here in Pune. Originally from France, is it, Lucy?
Yes.
Yeah.
France.
Yeah. So interesting. You talk about how hard it is to get real diversity. Do you want to just say a few words on that?
Yeah, and just for the record, I left MasterCard. I moved to another company now.
Okay. Sorry.
Where diversity is a bit of a problem. So yeah, what I was saying is it takes effort, and I'm gonna, follow up on what Jill said. First of all, it takes effort to catch your own unconscious bias all the time. It doesn't matter if you're a woman. It doesn't matter if you are, a feminist like I claim to be. The unconscious bias is there in your head, and it's gonna trip you all the time. So a question I ask beyond why is also what is going on right now? Why am I choosing the male candidate over the female candidate? Is it for really objective reasons, or is there something else at play? Did I judge her on her clothes, and so on and so forth? So this effort is there, and as an organization as well, it's great to say we want a diverse workforce, we want to be open to women, to LGBTQ, etc., etc. But it comes with work. And you mentioned at the beginning that yes, if I want to have disabled people join my workforce, I need to push ramps. Even to welcome women in my workforce, I need to first look at my data, right? What am I doing right now? How many female candidates am I interviewing? What happens after that? What is the rejection rate? Does it change when I hide the name? This kind of questions. And then what is my hiring pool right now? Am I only connecting with engineering colleges where I'm going to have 5% women? Have I even connected with the female colleges in Pune where I could find some great engineering profiles that are women? Am I attending LGBTQ friendly conferences and advertising my company as a LGBTQ friendly place? Etc., etc., right? So it's very easy to fall into a routine and come up with excuses such as, oh, these profiles are not available on the market, women don't pursue engineering studies, somehow LGBTQ people don't exist, we don't see them because they're not out, so it's not really a concern, etc., etc. So yeah, there's a lot of hard work coming with it, but it's worth it. And I completely agree with everything you guys have said in terms of engagement, in terms of innovation. It really works, and it's worth doing it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lucy. And Aman, you started off by saying, inclusion is hard. It's hard. It's difficult for people, and that's why they're challenged. I just saw time. Aman, do you want to say something?
I just want to say one thing, address something that Vishnu and others had brought up, but I also wanted to just check with people. Because those of you who know me know that I can keep talking till it's 12 a.m. So I'm actually very happy to be here and keep answering those questions. If you are, if you feel happy to hang around, do hang around. So just want to quickly, go to Vishnu's question. Vishnu had actually said, look, one of the risks about D&I is that it can become faddist, and you take measures, they seem like a fad, but it doesn't really have any impact. And I think Vandana and I were talking about this. She brought up an interesting incident. She was talking to a bunch of people, this is the board. You remember the board, Vandana, that was telling you, oh, we have a very diverse workforce. You know, we've got so much diversity in our workforce. And then Vandana asked them very politely, very nice, very nice. What about your leadership team?
Yeah.
And, you know, the challenge is that all
it's okay down there, but up here, not needed.
Yeah. And it's not going to work, you know, because your leadership team has the, you know, the onus of the culture of the organization. And if your leadership team is not going to force themselves to become uncomfortable, challenge themselves, have women and non-whites and non-blacks and non-Asians and, you know, LGBTQ, unless they're going to sit out there and become uncomfortable and learn how to overcome those challenges, they're not going to be able to do justice. And what Vishnu is then talking about will come true, unfortunately.
Mm.
And if I just may quickly add on top of that, because I think this is really, really interesting, right? And this is just personal experience. So very often I see myself and constant learning, like Jill was talking to, and also a little bit what Lucy was mentioning about, right? Constant feeling that, you know, you've got this great idea, let's go execute, right? Now, what I started doing very consciously over the last many years is saying, well, you've got this idea, you know that this group of people are going to challenge that idea from a personal and professional standpoint. You know that because you've had experiences with them where they're not just saying, oh, okay, you said it, let's go ahead, right? They're always challenging you. So consciously going back to them and saying that, you know, guys, folks, this is what I am thinking right now. Does this make sense? And 99%, I would say, honestly, it's led to some fresh new perspective, right? Which I hadn't thought of. The Diwali gift example, you know, one of the things that happened recently. And as Aman was saying, a lot of organizations actually do this as a checklist activity. Right? This is what we need to achieve. Let's go hire these many people from this community, gender, what have you. And, you know, a lot of it that comes instantly over a period of time, very naturally, without having to push. So to give you a statistics, since Aman, you brought up that example, 71% of my leadership is diversity, right? From that context. And I think a lot of these things, coming back to what Jill was mentioning, which I think is extremely important, is, you know, we all agree with all these motions and all the thoughts that we've been speaking about, but demonstrating those behaviors and working on those behaviors every day till they become second nature, I think is important, which is where the why, right? Question yourself, reflect yourself, do analysis on that, and, you know, accept that we all have room to improve. None of us are perfect. I've made tons of mistakes all my life, in reflection, right? And how do you get to that position and make it second nature to you?
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
great point. Okay, we are at 6:05, so apologies for overshooting. Just want to leave you with one thing. I mean, I think it's been a fabulous discussion. I think we could, as usual, go on for another couple of hours. We really encourage you to post, you know, your thoughts on, you know, what we discussed today, what made you think a bit, what steps you're going to take at home. That's what we want to know, to really bring in belonging and equity. And it leads quite nicely onto what we're going to be talking about next time, December 16th, 2020 at 5 p.m. We're going to be talking about values and what would the office look like if we all really showed up with our values, right? So that's our topic for December, but for the rest of November, and the beginning of December, we are going to be posting online about this. It's been such a fantastic discussion. Somi, thank you so much for being here and sharing your views. It's been really, really invaluable.
No, I loved the interaction. Vandana, Aman, thank you so much for having me. It was awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. And then thank you, obviously, to Jill and to Lucy and to Anupam and everyone who spoke, who wrote comments. It was great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. You know, I'm getting a sense, and you know, give me thumbs ups if you can, if you agree with me. I'm getting a sense that there is a desire for this conversation, you know, to have maybe a part 2 or something like that, because there are so many comments that are continuing to come through, right? So yeah, look at that. Great. Yeah. So, you know, one way of doing that is to please take your voice to LinkedIn, and please share your questions, your comments, your perspective, your aha moments, and please turn them into posts on LinkedIn, and please tag us. So what we can do is, while we may not have time right now here, but on LinkedIn, thanks to your perspectives, posts, and comments, we can actually get a large and wide conversation going around diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, etc. So if you can do that, we can actually start a movement which will be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe you're right. I mean, maybe what we can do is in January, let's revisit this. So if you send us your comments, if you put them up on LinkedIn, you email us, then what we can do is really craft the agenda on what you really want to hear us speaking about. We'll get you involved. You know that this is a free-for-all. And please do invite your friends to the next sessions if you found this useful, if it's made you think a bit. But it's been amazing as ever having you all here. All that's left for Aman and I to do is to wish you an extremely happy Diwali or festive period or time off, or if you haven't got time off, a really great weekend in a few days. And we really look forward to seeing you again in December. Thank you, everyone. Take care.